Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. An absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you about this incredible, profound, and very unique documentary. Um, Maybe you could
Thank
just
you.
kick off with a brief introduction. What can people expect when they see this? Because it's quite an individual concept, and not something people will have seen before.
Yeah, thanks. I think it is an unusual and interesting way to treat history, really. We've all seen so many films about 9/11, and almost like have we not seen everything that could possibly be seen about it? And I think what was extraordinary about discovering this really quite unseen archive that Ruth Circle had was the way that people who had been involved directly or indirectly on the day at the Pentagon or in New York and indeed in Shanksville were able to express themselves in a kind of honor, with a kind of honesty and safety of being in this box, in this video booth, that allowed them to talk about it in ways that you just don't normally see. So that was really the thing that was really striking when we saw the archive, and what set it apart from other films when people like me as directors sit down and talk to people who've been witnesses to something, was that we weren't there. The director wasn't there. There's just a camera and a video box, and people were allowed to share their feelings and their experiences. And that was really startling. And we realized that we did have something very special.
And what was the kind of genesis of the whole project? Had you already set out to make something about 9/11, and then you discovered, her art installation and of course the footage, or did you discover that first and decide that it was, ripe for turning into kind of this narrative film that you put together?
Yeah, it was actually it was my fellow director Bjorn Johnson, who I'd worked with. He's a wonderful editor anyway, and he and I had made a couple of films together, and so we knew each other well. What I didn't know was that he harbored a long held desire to make a film about 9/11. And whilst I knew that he'd lost his mum when he was a young man, what I didn't realize is that he lost his mum just a few weeks before 9/11. So he was in a terribly fraught and upset state in his life then anyway, 20 years ago, when he lost his mum. And when 9/11 happened, I think he felt a terribly strong kinship towards those people who'd gone through something equally traumatic. So it had been something that had been on his mind for a long time, to try and make a film about 9/11.
Mm.
So he was just burrowing away in the internet in the way we all do sometimes. And he literally just came across this very rather sort of obscure website in the back of Beyond in the internet, which was really just the archive of this artist called Ruth Circle. And he got hold of her and introduced himself. She was a well-known artist in New York, and told him that no one had really done anything with all this remarkable testimony. And Bjorn said, well, can I have a go at seeing whether I can shape it into something? Mm-hmm. At which point he rang me up and said, I think we've got something rather special. So I then came quickly on board. We all watched it together, and we realized we did have something very special, and realized that we had to make sure that we treated it in that kind of special way. In other words, don't make a film that's just like every other documentary. Don't put commentary on it. Don't try and retell the events. Just let these people speak to the experience that they had that day, and let them talk about their trauma, their grief. And obviously, as far as we were concerned, what was terribly important was to get them to talk about how they'd moved past that experience and whether they could move past it.
And then what was the process of kind of putting that together? Because I have no idea how much there was in terms of the original footage. And then, of course, you've spliced that together with other pieces of archival footage of, the events actually unfolding. Yeah. And then you've come back and you've been able to revisit you know, some of those interviewees in the modern day in this year. So, you know, what was that whole process like, and how long did that all take?
It was a really difficult process because there was a lot of footage. So there were over 570 people that have been in the video booth. Now that's in a normal film, you might possibly interview somewhere between 12 and 20 people for a film. We had 575 to get through, and over 120 hours of archive footage. So that's sort of 5-6 times what you would normally expect for a film. So there was an enormous volume of people to go through. Then, of course, we had to contact them because we couldn't use anybody that we thought was interesting and had something to say unless from their testimony, unless we reached out to them. But of course, the internet's an amazing thing. So we were able to find people relatively quickly. And then, as you say, there was also the question of all the archive and all from the day, both in the Pentagon and in New York. And of course, you know, if you can imagine it, there was a lot. But it was nothing like the kind of archive that you would imagine you'd get nowadays if such an event happened, where everyone has a phone, everyone is taking pictures. And so there was a challenge really to make sure that we got the right archive as well, that reflected what the film was about. So we tried not to use too much of the kind of television news archive at the beginning of the film, because the television journalists, the cameramen, weren't there at the beginning. They all rushed down there within the first 15, 20 minutes. But everything that you see in our film is from people who were on the streets taking their own little cameras out and just filming, because we felt it was really important to try and keep the story and the testimony and the pictures closely woven together, rather than take it away into some other kind of news dimension. And so we in the process of contacting all these people who had been in the original box, we were obviously just asking them for permission for us to use their testimony, which was, I think, almost in every single case, everyone agreed. I think there was one person who would rather not, but everybody else was delighted. And of course, in that context of doing the research, and of course, this is all during COVID, so we're just on Zoom conversations with people all over America. We just developed very strong relationships with a lot of people who would, of course, in the course of the events of chatting to them, would tell us what they've been up to, how they got on, how they'd recovered or not recovered from the experience of losing a husband, a brother, a close friend, or just simply the traumatic experience of watching something like that happen in your own backyard. So as we talked to them and got to know them, we realized there was a really, really interesting dimension to add to this film, which was, well, let's build a new box. Let's invite as many as we think we can muster back to New York and to Washington, and enter into our new box, but precisely the same rules. Like, the door is open, you can come in, you can sit down, you get to switch the camera on and switch the camera off, and you get to say whatever you want to say about the way your life has been in the last 20 years. And it was just a staggering experience as we watched and listened to these remarkable people talk about how they'd endured and what they'd gone through and how they'd survived, and the ways that they'd survived, what had allowed them to get past their grief and their trauma, and live a full and wholesome or happy life. Not always easy, but within the confines of this modern box, you had the same feeling, the same situation, that people felt comfortable and safe enough to tell their story in the way they wanted to.
And I can totally imagine when your partner first discovered the footage, how it must have seemed like, you know, discovering a treasure trove, because there is something so incredible about the way these people articulate themselves and it's hard to imagine that, it could be so fluent and so well put without any kind of prompting from an interviewer, or, having to have, set questions put to them. So what do you think it is about that concept which, just really allowed people to open up? And I guess, as one of the interviewees even said, it was like some kind of therapy, or perhaps cathartic. There was something really, incredible about that concept, which allowed people to share their story in such an amazing way.
It's such a good question. I think at a fundamental level, for me, it completely confirmed. I'm not sure I can do much about that sun. Is it
That's fine.
bothering?
No, it's fine. Don't
Okay,
worry.
fine. Yeah, it's a very good question. I think at a fundamental level, it just showed that we as humans are really good storytellers. We just want to sit down and tell people our stories. And we're just looking for, in a way, the most comfortable and the safest way to do it. And often in the world of documentary, you are asked questions, the cameras are put up, the lights are put up, they're shining on your face, and in a way you're sort of mediated into a space that the documentary filmmaker wants you to go, and so you can almost feel the need to deliver what they want you to deliver. I don't think that's always the case, but people often do that. Here there was none of it. They had control. They could walk into the booth, close the door, they could switch on the camera and switch it off anytime they liked. So I think there was this real sense that they had control over their own story. And so it was, in a sense, their truth. And that gave them confidence to talk. And I think the other thing, and you mentioned it, about the catharsis, of the cathartic nature of what they were doing. There's a very straightforward form of therapy when people are grieving, and that is to allow people to tell their story. And actually, the way you do that is not to try and empathize, not to try and rescue them, not to go, oh, that sounds terrible, poor you, but just simply to allow people to tell their story. And of course, inside the box, no one's rescuing anybody, no one's sympathizing or empathizing. They're just in the box on their own, able to talk in their own words, in their own way. And that's a very, very therapeutic way for people to get things off their chests. They don't feel someone's looking at them or judging them. They just can say what they want. And of course, empathy is something we all want, we all need to have, and everything else. But actually, when people have gone through something where they've suffered trauma, which is, it's a form of powerlessness. When you are traumatized, you lose control of things around you, and that's why you become traumatized. If you put yourself in this booth and you can switch on the camera and say what you want to say and switch it off when you want to, you're taking back control. And so you're actually finding a way of getting through what might be been a very traumatic experience, and one that you may not even really ever talked about as comprehensively or as emotionally as you did before you got into that, as you did when you got to that space.
The other thing that really strikes me watching it is, and I don't know whether this is like my own ignorance or perhaps because I'm British, and it's that I obviously knew what happened. I'd seen the images. I must have read so many things about 9/11, but watching the documentary, I felt like I was almost watching it happen for the first time, because there was so much in the footage and kind of the way it unfolded on that day that I realized I'd never really seen, or I'd never really read in that much detail. So do you think there's also something for audiences to kind of go back and relive it, but not through the eyes, like you say, of a news anchor, and of these kind of more distant pictures or kind of headlines, but rather, you know, through the eyes of the people who were there in the moment and living through it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you've absolutely put your finger on it. The people in the box were there. They experienced it. And so it's not my view of what happened in 9/11. So the pictures and images that have stayed with you are ones that, in a sense, we selected, but they were already selected by what people had said and felt about that day. So they were being suggested all the time by them, not me. Mm. So in fact, lots of people have talked to us about, gosh, I'd really forgotten that the Pentagon had happened as well, and it was really bad there. We've always sort of seen it as something that happened in New York. So just by introducing some really very compelling people who are telling the Pentagon story, you find the images that tell you the story of the Pentagon, and suddenly a world has opened up to you that you had forgotten or perhaps hadn't really thought that much about, because it's been so New York based, this story. Mm. And I think that whole idea of allowing people's words to really resonate, to sit in the film and to own the film, meant that we then had to find the images that would be properly suggestive of their feelings. And that meant we were going to be much more truthful in the documenting of the day from their perspective, from their point of view, than ours, wherever we had been sitting, but we weren't standing where they were.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, obviously, this did happen a long time ago. Why now to go back and revisit what happened? And, you know, it doesn't, you know, go too hard on like kind of any political viewpoint, but there's definitely the political themes there. Like certainly when we speak to, when we hear from the Muslim woman and, you know, what she tried to do and how she faced both, you know, hate mail and, you know, supportive messages from people. So there's that kind of thread running through it, you know, the guy that had to go to Afghanistan. What do you think the impact of all that is? And, you know, what do you hope people take away from this, watching it today?
Well, we really felt, just by talking to people 20 years later and the stories that they were telling us, that there was a real message of hope. And I think that was the thing that we felt, particularly because we were making this all the way through the pandemic. So we were just, you know, going into the edit suite every day, trying to work this material and living with, you know, a London that was virtually abandoned. People were stuck at home. People were grieving. There was a huge amount of distress and sadness in our country and of course in the world. So we just started to find that by listening to the way these people had recovered, that it was possible to both have a profoundly traumatic and upsetting experience, but it was possible to move past that, to find a way that you could live with it. As Mary says in the film, to accept the fact that your life, and she should know she lost her brother, but to accept the fact that your life will have joy and it will have sorrow, and each exist, and it's okay for them to be. It's okay for them to be in your life, for them both to live and you both to exist, and you can move past that, and you can find joy, and you can find a sort of new you. And I felt that, we both felt that, Bjorn and I both felt that was something that became incredibly important to us. The more we listened to what they were saying, and the more we were experiencing what we were all experiencing through the pandemic, that was a message of hope, really. There was a message that people could really feel that as bad as things go, this film shows that you can get past it. And that became terribly important to us.
And what do you think, you know, in terms of reflections on where things are in the US right now? Of course, we see, you know, a glimpse of some footage of the Black Lives Matter and protests and the Capitol Hill riots. And there was something really interesting. One of the interviewees said about how unified actually America felt, you know, sort of counterintuitively in the wake of 9/11 as to how it does now. So did you have any reflections on that kind of comparison?
Yes, and we were it was very important to us that we did reflect what was said to us by a lot of people in the modern booth, that they felt that extraordinary sense of America coming together, unifying, that had happened after 9/11 had disappeared. And so, as much as it's a film about hope, there's a cautionary tale to it. There's a word of warning that we need to nurture ourselves. We need to look after each other. If we don't, then things like January the 6th happen. Things like Black Lives Matter explode into hatred and divisiveness. And that was really the message that a number of people came into the booth to express, that their sorrow in certain circumstances, that unifying feeling that they'd had when they went to Ground Zero to try and help, or when they were just simply observing America, had gone. And they felt the lack of that in America now. So I felt it was really important that we reflect that. It didn't need to be a major part of the film, but the film needed to be truthful to their sentiments. And so it's a cautionary note, isn't it, that the message that these people have given us of hope is to reach out. If you reach out and you connect with people, it's astonishing how much good can be achieved. If you don't, and if you become siloed, and if you become introspective and withdrawn, then the dangers are apparent in what we saw in America in the last year, 2 years.
All right. Well, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for making this really wonderful and touching and eye-opening documentary.
Well, thank you very much. I hope what I said made some sense. And
oh yeah, absolutely, it did. Very, very articulate. So
you'll tidy it up, won't you?
I will do. Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot,
Okay,
David.
Sarah.
Lovely to speak
Okay,
to you.
bye.
Have a
Bye.
great day. Bye.